Hooray! We made it to the last module. Give yourself a pat on the back. It's the final countdown. All right, let's get through this so you can take your quiz and be on your way. Last module, I'll cover real fast what the difference is between dyslexia, dysgraphia, and a specific learning disorder in reading comp, reading fluency, basic reading skills, or written expression. Okay, so we already talked earlier about what a specific learning disability is, right? So you should be a professional in this now. We already talked about how a specific learning disability, you are looking for, the hallmark of it is a pattern of strengths and weaknesses. You have to find a cognitive pattern of strengths and weaknesses and an achievement pattern of strengths and weaknesses. And then they have to match up together, right? So this is the one we looked at earlier where we had the pattern of strengths and weaknesses. We had all strengths over here cognitively, and then we had two weaknesses in auditory processing and fluid reasoning, which then explained why the student was having difficulty in the learning areas or achievement areas of reading comprehension and written expression. So these were the achievement areas of weakness, and then she had achievement areas of strength over here in the average. So average, strength, weaknesses, below average. And we had them both cognitively and achievement, right? So her specific learning disability was in reading comprehension and written expression due to auditory processing and fluid reasoning deficits, okay? So know that a specific learning disability is that pattern of cognitive strengths and weaknesses. So a learning disability in reading comprehension, reading fluency, basic reading skills, or written comprehension would be just that, the pattern of cognitive strengths and weaknesses, but those achievement areas would be one or a combination of any of those, okay? So keep that in your brain. Whereas on the specific learning disorder, you had the strengths and weaknesses. You had some that were average, but then you had some that were below average. In dyslexia, you're average. Your overall is average, okay? This would mean that if you have a student who qualifies as a slow learner, they will not qualify for dyslexia immediately, right out of the hat. They do not qualify. We don't even have to test any of this other stuff because if they do not have overall average intelligence, they're not going to qualify for dyslexia. If you have a student who is intellectually disabled, they're not going to qualify for dyslexia. Again, you have to have overall average to above average intelligence, okay? Then, the second thing we look at is, do they have difficulty with encoding, which would be spelling, decoding? Those are the big two that we look at. And then that's going to cause difficulty with word recognition and fluency. These are the big four that we look at for dyslexia. These are caused by difficulties with the phonological components of language. So it's not so much the words on the page, but it's being able to hear k, a, t, and know that that spells cat, being able to blend those together, or being able to hear the word map What's the third sound you hear in the word map? A, p, p, p is the third sound you hear. It's being able to hear all those sounds and play with them and decode them and encode them and make sense of them, okay? That's dyslexia. Okay, here is a profile. Again, one of my students from this year who qualified for dyslexia. Now, you can see this is the Texas Scottish Rite profile for dyslexia. They are one of the leaders in identifying dyslexia in the state of Texas, and this is the profile that they came up with, and so it's what we use to help us identify. As you can see right up here, it's a little bit different, their number averages, than when identifying a specific learning disorder. They narrow it a little bit, that their average is 90 to 109. Some profiles do that, and that's not abnormal. So we look at 90 or below 90 to be below average for dyslexia. So we look right here, this whole section is a test called the CTOP, and the whole test is all about phonological processing, like what I just told you. You blend words on one of it. You dissect a word on one of it. You are able to pick out parts of a word on one of it. Phonological memory on part of it. Rapid naming of letters and numbers on one of it. It's all about those sounds and your working memory and everything. And so you can see that he was below average in all of those areas, and so that is a hallmark of dyslexia. So this is the test that we use for auditory processing. So kiddos that have trouble with dyslexia do have difficulty with auditory processing, okay? Now, the characteristics of dyslexia right here, the big heavy hitters that we always look at are the decoding and encoding, but we do also look at these areas, the word recognition and fluency, and you can see that he was below average in all of these areas except for the rate. He was quicker at the rate, but even though he was quicker, he was not accurate. So he was just sort of making up some words there on what he was reading. So an accuracy is, in my opinion, more important than rate. One thing to know about dyslexics is that even though they have difficulty with reading, they can learn to be good readers. They may never be quick readers, but they can learn to be good readers with proper instruction and interventions. So just because you find out that you have dyslexia, it's not the end of the world, okay? There are wonderful, wonderful interventions, and we have got some wonderful teachers in our district who do amazing things with our kids who are identified with dyslexia. So it's not the end of the world, okay? Now, some sort of comorbid things that go along with dyslexia is you've got these things right here, the characteristics, and because of these, oftentimes you will have difficulty with reading comprehension and written expression due to the fact that we're having so much trouble here with, we spend so much time and energy trying to decode and trying to recognize those words and trying to read fluently, that by the time we spend all that energy doing these things, we have nothing left to give in these areas. So we really, and you can see right here how that encoding, that lower encoding score is really giving us trouble with the written expression. It's really, really showing up right there, okay? His IQ was a 92, so that's in the average zone. So he was good to go there. His oral language, listening comprehension skills can be a comorbidity. This student was also, he is also a special ed student for ADHD. And that is often a comorbidity with a coexisting complication with dyslexia. So this was not surprising that he had trouble with listening. That's often lower for our kids with ADHD. His math was average. That is something we look for, are the math skills in the average zone versus reading. He could have had dyscalculia or a specific learning disorder with math, but in his case, he was doing fine. His big problem was with his phonological. So, I mean, he was just beautiful profile right here for dyslexia, just a very classic profile. So he did qualify as a student with dyslexia and will be receiving services. So there you go. Dysgraphia. We're going to talk a little bit about it because there is a lot of confusion about what it is and how do we refer for it and what do we do. So dysgraphia is a disorder, and you're going to see a lot of illegible or inefficient handwriting due to difficulty with letter formation. And these deficits are in the graphic motor function, have to do with storing and retrieving orthographic codes due to working memory deficits, and sometimes it also has to do with their hand and processes there. There's still a lot that we're learning about dysgraphia. It's still sort of new, and there's a lot of sort of conflicting information out there about it. What we do know is that a lot of what people think of as dyslexia really is kind of more dysgraphia. So it's a written language disorder in the serial production of strokes for handwriting letters. So if kids are having trouble recalling letters and what they look like, that's dysgraphia. If they're having trouble with writing their pressure amount, with writing rainbows on the page, you know, where they write goofy, where they write correct spacing, where they we'll get to some of that here in a minute, some of the different signs you can look for. It's sort of a strange one, okay? It is related to working memory and handwriting. Orthographic refers to the ability to store written words in the working memory. And so they have a difficult time remembering those codes, what the letters are. And so they have a hard time remembering what the words look like, the letters, and then being able to put that on paper. Oftentimes, a child with dysgraphia will be able to spell a word for you orally, but then you ask them to write it down and they're not able to do it. They may have trouble with orthographic coding or planning sequential finger movements. So these are some of the things that go into it. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but the phonological coding, we already talked about the orthographic and the working memory. Phonological coding is segmenting spoken words. Morphological coding, coding of the base root word with suffixes and prefixes. RAN measures the ability to name familiar symbols and single letter groups. And then RAS measures the executive function of switching categories. So this is the simple view of writing and how it all sort of plays together, and how there's the hiccup sort of here in the working memory. You've got the mechanics, the handwriting, spelling, spacing, punctuation, and the executive functioning, and these two are trying to work together, and then the working memory has a difficult time putting these two together to then combine it for the content, ideas, and voice. So these are just a few of the things to look for with dysgraphia. Poorly formed letters, excessive erasures and crossouts, poor spacing between letters and words, letter and number reversals beyond the early stages of writing, awkward pencil grip, heavy pressure and hand fatigue, slow writing, illegible handwriting, poor spelling, difficult, unedited, and a low volume of written output, as well as other aspects of written expression. Again, oftentimes these kids, if you ask them orally to give you the information, they can give it to you. It's trying to give it to you in print where the disconnect happens. Here is some information that can give you some more detailed information. This is put out by TEA. It's the Dyslexia Handbook, and it is the most updated version that they have. It's got a lot of information on dyslexia, and then it's actually got a little bit of information on well, looky there, I put the same thing. That's funny. It's got a little bit of information on dysgraphia in there as well. So if you will check that out if you want to, or you can just Google Dyslexia Handbook 2018 and it'll pop up the most recent version. It's got some of the most recent information in there as far as TEA goes on dyslexia and dysgraphia. So if you have questions between the two and you're considering making a referral between the two, and you're just not sure which way to go, feel free to contact me or your diagnostician. Just remember that dyslexia is really and truly more auditory with difficulties. Dysgraphia is more orthographic on the paper, where the difficulties are. If they're having trouble with the editing, if they're having trouble with the mechanisms, also your kiddos with dysgraphia typically won't have a hard time reading. They typically just have a hard time with the spelling and the writing. There is a such thing as dyslexic dysgraphia, but I'm not going to get into all of that. Just another quick side note, there is a very, very small portion of the population that has dyslexia and can qualify for a specific learning disability as well. I'm not going to get into that either, but it can happen. But this is a teeny tiny portion of the population. So don't worry about that. Worry about your referral and what you're referring for. And if you need any sort of guidance on that, always feel free to contact us and chew our brains a little bit and see if we have a recommendation or if you need advice on any of that. So thank you for listening in today, and hopefully you got something out of this, some sort of helpful information, and hopefully you'll have a great summer and get some relaxation time in, and can't wait to see everyone in the fall.